Welcome back, Wetaskiwin, for Jessi Hanks for council. Hi, Jessi. How are you?
I'm good, Scott. How are you?
Good, thanks. This is Jessi's part 2 interview, which we're going to find out all about city topics. Let's start with taxes in the economy. Jessi, do you think that, what's your plan to keep the taxes low, or do you think they're low now, or are you planning on raising taxes? Where do you sit with taxes?
So currently the tax rate hasn't increased in the last 2 budgets. I think 2019 we actually seen a reduction. However, the state of certain things in our city kind of make the tax rate feel a little high. So road conditions, crime, etc. If we could lower the cost of, say, what we're spending on crime, we could then have more free money freed up in our budget to possibly even lower taxes. We would find ourselves with a bit of a surplus. So in the meantime, perhaps we could find some other ways to get some revenue into Wetaskiwin by utilizing our rich history in town and our natural gorgeous spaces, really kind of start advertising those a little bit better.
Sure. Do you think that our tax money is allocated appropriately or spent wisely in City Hall?
And so I think council is doing everything they can to utilize money coming in ways that are beneficial to the community. I'm not so sure that they're being utilized appropriately by each department, however. So like, for instance, with the Rcmp and crime, I really think that we're missing a lot of the mark on utilizing the funds that we actually have in an appropriate manner. Yeah, I think that we could really utilize some of our money a little bit better in fixing up our roads and focusing a little bit more on that infrastructure end.
All right. As everybody talks about, the more businesses in Wetaskiwin, the more taxes they'll attribute, and more people come to town and buy housing and pay taxes. So, How do you think we can attract more business or more economic development, Jessi?
No, that was the tough question for me. So I think that to attract the economic development part in Wetaskiwin, we have to show that the base is actually here and we have to support it. So unfortunately, because of local issues, our base is actually moving away from Wetaskiwin. So if we could support industrial growth on the outskirts of our city with good paying jobs and benefits, I think that we could really encourage the wealth and health of our local population a little bit better. Appearances do matter in Wetaskiwin, right? So the facade in the benefit in the budget was a great start. We can't compete with shopping in Wetaskiwin, so we can't really, we're too close to Edmonton to really offer those services, but the experience should remain just as good. And I think that we're really missing the mark on that. And again, I think it all does come back to what Wetaskiwin is portrayed as right now.
All right. As far as services go, do you think that there's any services you'd be willing to cut or remove from Wetaskiwin currently?
So I wouldn't really say that I want to remove any services in Wetaskiwin, but I do think that the advertising that we've been putting out lately is a little bit premature. If you look at, like, we have YouTube ads and we're trying to change the perception of Wetaskiwin, unfortunately, we haven't really changed the root cause of why we're facing these issues. So I feel like if we're putting that advertising out right now, it might not be the best received. We all kind of see that on a day-to-day basis.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about services that you think we're lacking in. What do you think we could use in Wetaskiwin that we currently don't have, if anything?
I'd like to see more inclusive city events. More Indigenous representation in our architecture, real land acknowledgements in Wetaskiwin. I'd like to see FCSS utilized a lot like Ermineskin's Brighter Futures, constantly running those programs of supporting community social development. I think that would be very beneficial to Wetaskiwin. We need more mental health supports in Wetaskiwin. While the city's not really responsible on that side, we can approach it indirectly through social well-being programs.
All right. And then a little bit about local businesses. If you were on the board that decided whether or not a business got a project and you received 2 quotes, one was from a local business and one was from an out-of-town business, but the local business quote was higher, which one do you choose and why?
That was also a hard question. So without a lot of the other background information that would go along with it, like what qualifications do the employees have, what are the reputations of the company, what does their work actually look like? It's hard to answer that question, but the local girl in me wants to say within a certain percent, I would choose local first.
All right. Let's move on into the next topic, which I'm sure you've mentioned this section already several times. But before we start, I grouped crime and homeless together, and I didn't intend to have it look like the homeless people are creating the crimes in Wetaskiwin. So I should have had them as two categories, which I found early on through my interview process. But that said, I wasn't able to, change it for everybody, so I just left it in. But I don't. That's not what I intended to have it read like. But Jessi, what do you think, which crime in Wetaskiwin impacts Wetaskiwin the most, and do you have a plan to deal with it?
So if I was really sitting and thinking about speaking with all the community members, keeping an eye on local social media, and personally what I go through at my job, petty theft is probably the biggest crime that Wetaskiwin faces right now, specifically with bikes in particular. How you address that really is, it's kind of a multi-faced answer. Why are they stealing bikes? People are trying to get to places. We don't really have much for public transit in Wetaskiwin that's on a large enough scale. So maybe we could look at subsidizing some taxi company so that people have that option of accessibility versus going out and taking your neighbor's bike to get across town. So that's one thing that I would like to really, really address. And also, I don't think that we could address it even through our pawn shops, because I do believe they can be utilized to kind of fuel the crime, right? That's where people are taking their goods to. But without pawn shops in Wetaskiwin, we have a lot of low income and middle class families who might be without that intermediate loan type system that isn't a payday loan. So really, I think to address that petty crime, we really need to work with our officers. And the officers need to work better with the Wetaskiwin court system, because that's where a lot of things are starting to get hung up, right? The crimes don't really want to... There's not enough time in our court system to deal with these petty thefts constantly, and we just don't have enough officers. So it's a lot of paperwork for them. I've spoken to a lot of people in town, and it's just they're not getting the results on that end. So I really do think that we could help address these petty crimes by getting that bike registration program in place that was supposed to be put in place. I'm hopeful that it still does happen. I forget what the timeline was on it, but we should have a widespread community event where we're registering our bikes to really make sure that people are taking that proactive stance. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about what do you have a plan? I know that you've been working at Castle, and this has been an ongoing issue. So I'm sure if you had a solution, you would have found it by now. But what can we do to help reduce panhandling, public intoxication, and the loitering that these people are doing while they're performing those nuisance bylaw infractions?
Well, like you said, I've been dealing with that issue specifically at our location for 2.5 years now. I wish I had a full rounded answer for it. So that's actually why I sit on these committees, is because I want to make sure that my community is safe, as well as all of the community members. And that's from the homeless to law-abiding citizens and all in between. I really think that the best way to tackle this right now is to have a proper support system in place for these people, because I can call the Rcmp and they can tell them to leave, but they leave to nowhere, and then they come back because they have nowhere else to be. So I think really, really starting to work on our social issues could change a lot of these problems. Inspector Durance actually said that this isn't a policing problem. It's not a policing issue. And I will have to tend to agree with him, because I've watched the Rcmp struggle to keep that side of town as safe as it could be. So I really think that if we started to look at different social programs, different avenues for these people to start accessing, so that they can finally do better in their life and want to be integrated into society, I think that would be the best way to approach it.
From a previous council meeting, I've heard that you had to call the RCMP a lot of times. You can comment on the number. But what are your thoughts on the local RCMP when it comes to response time and the level of service that we get when we do contact them and need their service? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think at the meeting that I went to council and I spoke to them about the issues we were going through, I was at like it was $144,000 they spent on policing that location in approximately 2 years. So I definitely feel like I am educated enough to speak on that issue. Their response times vary. It depends on, I suppose, who's working, how many are working in the day, if they're dealing with more serious issues. But I do notice that the public intoxication is lower on the list of emergent issues. However, for us, it can turn into an emergency very quickly. So thankfully, we've been working with some really good officers lately who have been working with us and with the people who sit in these areas to really get them to move past where they're sitting and get them back to either a home or the encampment, or just so they're not surrounding the business entrances anymore. So it's been a positive experience as of late, working with a few of the officers.
So I think you touched on this earlier. Do you think that Wetaskiwin is short, like doesn't have enough bylaw and RCMP, or do you think we have enough of them and they're just not, like they're out of control with the amount of calls they're getting? Where do you think for level of quantity we're sitting at?
I think that we're lacking still on our RCMP officers, like with speaking to multiple members, that we're down quite a few members, so the response times are starting to get a little bit longer and longer. I do also feel like our RCMP are dealing with a lot of other issues beyond the vagrancy or the panhandling and loitering, public intoxication. So sometimes I feel like we actually don't give them enough credit. They really work hard in our community, and I think that they should be recognized for that. Is it frustrating in the moment when I can't get an officer to attend? It very much is. I wish that we could hire more CPOs and peace officers to possibly take that brunt load, because we definitely are lacking in that area as well.
So you'd work on increasing then if you were to get into council, right? Okay.
Yeah, I would. I noticed that they did that special council meeting recently, and it was talked about having security on the south side. I don't know if you caught that. Security was barely passed through. So I'm happy that they noticed a need for it and are trying to ease that burden a little bit off the RCMP, so maybe that they can start attending the more serious crimes in Wetaskiwin.
All right, let's spend some time talking about homelessness now, Jessi. What do you think that the city council should be doing in the short term and then the long term, if you want to bundle it all together and just go for a...
It's actually, I sit on the Wetaskiwin Homeless Coalition, and I sit on the Emergency Winter Shelter Subcommittee. So I have long-term and short-term plans personally. We did go in at the direction of council for the emergency winter proposal. They went with a 24/7 support type model with security and Narcan training on the south side. Long term, I would like to see a lot more. I think we really need to look at transitional housing so that we can start to address reintegrating people back into society, because right now we don't have that next step in Wetaskiwin, and I think that's what's making it so hard for people to maintain sobriety and even begin to achieve it. If they don't have that base to land in after rehabilitation, we're really doing them a disservice as a community.
Would you like to see rehabilitation services or buildings in Wetaskiwin? Kind of how I know that the 24/7 hub that the Open Door was running was supposed to be like a full service. They have everything, a shelter component and dealing with all the other social issues and addictions and all sorts of things. Do you think that we should have a separate building like that if it could be run safely? Do you think Wetaskiwin should have something like that?
I think every community should have some kind of addiction services, because unfortunately it is an issue in every community. It's not unique to Wetaskiwin, so I don't think that that's I don't think that it's something that we can say specifically only Wetaskiwin needs. I think that it's needed on a very provincial level. I would never want to see anything like the Open Door in the exact same way it was run back in Wetaskiwin, because there was a lot of serious issues with that and they weren't addressed appropriately. They weren't addressed at all, actually, until the closure. So that's a tough one, because I want to see certain supports in place, but I would never go back to that kind of a model.
So do you think with certain supports in place that a facility could exist safely in Wetaskiwin and the residents wouldn't have to fear the area?
I think that having a 24/7 shelter mixed in with the services was not a good idea for our community specifically. I think that, we do have mental health and addictions. We have that building. We have amazing women and men who work in that building. And I think that we need to start utilizing them. It is a great service that Wetaskiwin has. So I think that we already have it on some level. Maybe if we could include, and that's a provincial kind of issue too, right? All the funding comes from there. I don't think Wetaskiwin needs a separate building as well to tackle these things. I do think we need a shelter, though, in place that is a safe, secure building for not only the people using it, but the surrounding community. The shelter will be going on the side of community that I actually work in. So it's very important to me that this be run a lot better than our last couple goes at the shelter.
Right. Would people be able to access the service if they're under the influence of something, or would it just be like more of a dry shelter in your mind?
So the shelter, Wetaskiwin has complex issues when it comes to intoxication and addictions, much like a lot of other communities, but putting that barrier in would not reduce the level of panhandling that we're seeing in Wetaskiwin. If we made it a dry shelter, we would still see these very people continue to be on the streets. So really, I think getting them in and giving them those basic needs to start, the food, the shelter, and heat through the winter, could give them that step up to next steps. I don't think an emergency shelter should ever be a long-term solution. I think that it should be a very short-term plan for the long-term goal of getting them off into detox or into rehabilitation. And unfortunately, Wetaskiwin just does not have the population to support such a large facility.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to touch on with homelessness, Jessi, or move on?
I think I got most of it out that I wanted to say. I do think that supporting our homeless population in getting them into a shelter, a properly run shelter, mind you, we will see a lot less crime on the south side, and I would have somewhere to redirect people to go. So I think that it's very vital to keeping the south side of Wetaskiwin as safe as it can be right now.
Sorry, and just to clarify, did you think that a shelter should be year-round or just during the cold months of the winter?
I think that we need a bunch of different levels of sheltering in Wetaskiwin. So we are very much lacking in a domestic violence shelter, a women's shelter. We have nowhere for women and children to go who are at risk. We have nowhere for seniors to go who are at risk. So I do think in Wetaskiwin, we need to have at the very least an emergency shelter year-round that can be utilized by more than one demographic.
All right. With a limit of how many people per night it can have, and then
Absolutely, yes. I think that limits are important, and setting boundaries are important for Wetaskiwin, because we can't every shelter has a limit on them, right? There's only so much beds, so much money, so much resources, and having put in 8 hours a day, 7 days a week on building these proposals, the limitations exist, and it's unfortunate, but we have to stick with it.
All right. We are going to go into talking about our neighboring communities. Jessi, how important do you think, or do you have any plan on strengthening the relationships between the communities? And this could be Maskwacis, Millet, Camrose, Ponoka, the smaller towns near us. Do you have any plans with that?
I think that we do need to strengthen our relationship with Maskwacis. I often think of Maskwacis as an extension of a community. We're so closely interacting and so closely related all the time. I do think that we need to start building that relationship back from the ground up, and I know that great steps have been made so far, so I want to see those go a little bit further, and I want to see people really putting their best foot forward with rebuilding those relationships. I think Wetaskiwin has a good relationship with Camrose as it stands. Panoka, we have a good relationship with them as well, so I'd really just like to focus on Musquecheese.
All right. Do you think that do you plan on any truth and reconciliation initiatives over and above what you've seen the city do so far?
Well, I would like to see a public commitment on the part of the city to address a number of the TRC calls to action every year. So some of them are quite hard to manage on a municipal level, but I think working towards at least one or two every year would be imperative to growing Wetaskiwin in a positive manner.
Awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit about current council. What, if anything, Jessi, is council getting right?
I think that they're getting a lot of things right in the sense that they're working towards integrating history back into Wetaskiwin. I think that a lot of efforts have been made on a lot of council's behalf to really honor Wetaskiwin's roots. But I guess I'll lead into what I think council's getting wrong with my butt at the end of that. I think Wetaskiwin's council currently focuses too much on the marketing of Wetaskiwin when really we're not actually addressing the history of Wetaskiwin and how we got to where we are. You know, we have this mentality of we're fine as is, but I would beg to differ with the current state of Wetaskiwin and what we've seen in the news lately. So I think that council has gotten a lot of things right within honoring our history, but I think that they need to make some improvements.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to the next section. What do you think Wetaskiwin's biggest problem is, and how would you solve it, Jessi?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. I think Wetaskiwin's biggest problems, I think that there's quite a few of them, actually. Obviously, we have a problem with the homeless population. I think we have a problem with our relationship with our closest neighbors. And I really think that working on those two things right now are not the most important issue, but a very pressing issue.
All right. And ultimately, Jessi, what's your vision for Wetaskiwin? How would you like to see it after 4 years of you being on council or longer?
So after 4 years of me being on council, if I do get elected by the good people of Wetaskiwin, I would like to... Obviously, I think anybody who's running right now wants to see it left in a better state than when we got it. So I would like to see Wetaskiwin continue to be more inclusive, continue to work towards truth and reconciliation efforts. I would like to see our roads fixed. I would like to see more services offered at that basic family level, right? As a family, a young family in Wetaskiwin, I really feel like we could do a lot more to support the young families growing in this city.
All right. And a kind of a fairy tale question. If you had access to unlimited resources, somebody said, here, Jessi, here's a bunch of money, but you got to spend it right now. What would you pick and, what would you do with it?
That question I had a lot of fun with. So at first it was a rainbow Pegasus for all citizens. However, that is extremely fanatical. But what I would do if I had unlimited funds is I would build senior complexes and family complexes, and where nobody would have to pay rent or any utilities or any bills. And I do think that providing that for our seniors would be my first priority.
All right, good. We have a couple of bonus questions today, Jessi, before we wrap up our interview. The first is on COVID-19. And I know that when the COVID was first started, City Council implemented a mask bylaw, which was over and above the provincial restrictions. Being that our vaccination rates in Wetaskiwin are a little lower than provincial average, do you think it's the role or job of council to go over and above the provincial regulations and impose further restrictions on our citizens?
No. So I don't think that it's council's job to go over and above what the province is already doing. I think that the municipality is doing a fine job of what they were tasked with doing. And I think that any more enforcement at this point is just a gross overstep.
All right. Next question is the federal election. We just went through a federal election. What are your thoughts on the outcome?
My thoughts on the outcome of the federal election were Alberta was underrepresented yet again. So I feel like Alberta was not heard. You can look at the maps and you can see what was a majority vote over here, and it feels very, very saddening for my province. I know that much.
And lastly, on politics, if Jessi Hanks was a political party, or if you followed the ideals of one political party, which political party would you closely in line with the way that you would handle decisions on council? NDP, Liberal, PC, Green Party, and all those, marijuana party. Is there still a marijuana party?
I've taken my fair share of political tests to see where I land. And oddly enough, I land with none of them. So I'm a little bit of everything. So I like to call myself like my own party. I want to make sure fellow man is taken care of, and I want to protect my water, and I want to protect, the farmers in Alberta and my oil field family. So I don't know if I could fully align with any actual party. I think I would sit right in the middle and pull the bits from all of them to make myself up.
Great. Before you tell us how they can how citizens can contact you for more information, do you have any closing thoughts or anything else to talk about that we haven't touched on that you'd like to talk at this time about?
I would just like to thank you for actually inviting me to this interview and wearing your chicken hat. I very much appreciate it. I think also I would like to just make everybody aware that I'm very interested in positive collaboration with whoever will end up on council, regardless of who ends up on council. I think that it's important that people continue to love and advocate for Wetaskiwin on the grassroots levels, all the way up to sitting at a table at council. So I want everybody to just continue pushing forward, because I know that we're going to do great things in this city.
Awesome. And then next, tell everybody how they can contact you for further information, Jessi.
So you can contact me on Facebook at Jessi Hanks. You can contact me on my Instagram. You can email me. Everything is listed on the municipal election page. You can reach out to me if you'd prefer a phone call, and we can chat, and we could go for coffee. It's basically, I am always available now. Great.
You mentioned you were thankful for me for inviting you, and funny story is that my parents, when I said I was going to do this, my mom's like, is anybody going to take you seriously? And I was like, well, I think people that watch the content I produce, they will know very quickly onto the videos whether they're a serious nature or a very ridiculous nature. So thank you, because
I always take you seriously, so you can let your mother know that yes, this was taken very seriously, and I have nothing but respect for you, because you're always constantly advocating for Wetaskiwin in a positive manner. So hi, Scott's mom. He's doing a great job.
Nice. That's a first, by the way. Anyways, all right. With that, everyone, we're going to say goodnight to Wetaskiwin. We will see you on the next video. If this is the last video you watch, make sure you get out and vote this year, because it's super important that we all choose and pick the right people to run our city. So, bye, Wetaskiwin. Thank you.